I wanted to share some general ideas this evening with you on tonight's topic, with reference really to the thought of the UPF founders, that's Reverend and Mrs. Sun Myung Moon, particularly how some religious insights might have very necessary and, as my title says, universal application to the topic that we're looking at on this special week. I'm not sure if some of you were here when I spoke last. It was December the 2nd, and you might have come to a Peace Council meeting. If so, one or two things will be repeated, but for good reason, right? I want to develop those ideas, but no worry. When I came then, I talked about the unificationist respect for God's work through the world's religions, the great religions, as arising from first principles in unification theology. So it's there in the core text, the kind of recognition of God's work in all religions. And that's quite significant, actually. This text, the exposition of the divine principle, has a section on elucidating God's plan to ready the world for positive change through giving rise to the various religious developments all around the world in a particular period. That was the period 600 to 400 years BCE, or before Christ. So that was an extraordinary fertile period, a kind of narrow window of time, and you saw the rise of these great figures. You have Confucius there and Lao Tzu in China. You have Gautama Buddha. You have Zoroaster. You have reformations going on in Hinduism with the Upanishads, a kind of new look at centrality of God and God's nature. You have a character, here's the only photograph I could find of Malachi, right? Yeah. So, their last prophet of the Old Testament, as we say in Christianity, for the Jews. This was the prophet Malachi, coming on the back of kind of reformation there in Judaism, and a really new start and a back to the roots kind of movement. And also the divine principle, unification principles, include the Greek philosophers such as Socrates, not normally thought of as a religious leader, maybe, but still part of this current and this development, and leaving a very precious legacy to humanity. So all these developments took place in a particular period, as we said, 600 to 400 BCE, and happening in different places at different times. No real connectedness, apart from maybe just some spiritual change going on to prepare humankind for the modern world. Now, the scholar and very compassionate soul, I also quoted from her last time, Karen Armstrong. I think quite a few of you are aware of her work. She refers to this period as the Great Transformation, and wrote a book under that title. Also you have the likes of Karl Jaspers, the philosopher. He talks about it as the axial period. You might have heard reference to that as well. So scholars have noted the kind of big change that came about and ideas that flowed from this particular time. Here's a quotation which I showed last time from Karen Armstrong. And there she says, as far as these sages, these wise figures were concerned, respect for the sacred rights of all human beings, this was religion. If people behaved with kindness and generosity to their fellows, they could save the world. But actually the sentence that follows that I really want to focus on tonight and bring your attention to, she then says, we need to rediscover this ethos we must learn to live and behave as though people in countries remote from our own are as important as ourselves. I think beautifully expressed. Of course, it doesn't have to be people who are very remote. It can be neighbors and people in different groups within our own society. But her point, I think, is very well made here. And there was an opportunity or a vision for this back then in this axial period. But somewhere, if we really examine the state of our religions today, perhaps we either have lost some of that or haven't made as much of it as we could and should have, right? So it's often noted, I think, how the supposedly unbiased and very objective news that we receive, especially via television, sometimes has an odd sense of priorities, doesn't it? You know, the plight of some peoples in the world are almost disregarded, and yet a trivial story, maybe about a celebrity who is rather close to home, that may headline the day's news. Of course, it's not just the news makers, they are thinking about their audience, really. So it's a reflection of us as the audience, as well as those who produce that kind of coverage. But it does leave a kind of question, not such a good taste in the mouth, really, right? When you think of it in relation to this idea that Karen Armstrong expresses, that somewhere we have to feel for others, even on the other side of the world, as if they were our own and our own family in that respect. Last time I was also showing this diagram. I use it as a kind of starting point here. This is commonly used kind of picture to accompany lectures in unification thought or unificationism. And it expresses the three great blessings to humanity, which are referred to in the beginning of Genesis. But much more than that. It's much more general than that. It's not really doctrine from my point of view. It's about life itself. That is, what is our happiness? What is our purpose in life? And how do we fulfill that? We fulfill it through these kind of three, not really stages. A lot happens concurrently, but we find our perfection as an individual, reaching for spiritual maturity, having our mind and body work together in the kind of right happy relationship. So we become a person of integrity by having our deeds follow our words, and this means a person of heart and a person of love, a person who resonates with God's own heart. And such a mature person then naturally wants to embark on the next great stage of life, would have a natural yearning to find a good partner, settle down, get married, have children, have a family, have something to pass on to the next generation, and in doing so also building their own foundation based on their unique qualities and the contribution they can make to society by living in harmony with nature and the environment around them, which is the third blessing. So these kind of three blessings are really talking about everything in life which brings us happiness. And I challenge people sometimes. I say, under this scheme, can you find anything for your happiness which is not there, right? And people scratch their heads, mostly can't find. Everything fits into one of these kind of categories, the things that really mean most to us. And I think it's a description of the hopes, of the aspirations, the possibilities of life that allow us to respond to the very purpose for which we are created, and it's the source of our happiness. Today I want to focus on the second of these. This is love in the family extended to the world. And indeed, in most kind of lecture situations, you'll find it expressed something like this. The second great blessing. There it is, husband and wife in that family situation, but with children, develops a family, which then kind of expands that love which is found in the family to society, to the nation, to the world, and even to the cosmos. Cosmos in this context is meaning the kind of spiritual and physical dimensions of the universe. So it's really saying that the family and the love which is experienced or can be experienced in the family as part of the Creator's design should be expanded and become the norms and the standard for all human relationships in the world. That's where we learn to be a citizen of this world and learn to feel for others as if actually they were part of our own family. So that is the kind of extension of this idea that we should have this kind of feeling and concern for the other. It's really learnt and imbued in a human being through their upbringing in a loving and caring family. But perhaps also needs a bit more conscious education, to make that point come home. So here we see the family is shown as multiplying out to the wider society, nation, world, and cosmos. And this model naturally builds as its kind of end goal an ideal, peaceful world where all human beings are one family. You could say this is how it should be. Right? To have such an ideal in mind, I think, is very important. Otherwise, the tendency, and we see it today in a lot of talk which goes on, the tendency is for everything to adapt to the lowest common denominator. By talk of such ideals, I know one can be open to accusations of not accepting reality or being too naive. However, I believe personally that this is exactly where a united perspective of religions working together can contribute. Spiritual truth, after all, is often simple, but it's very profound. And the implications of viewing all humankind as one family are huge and immensely important. I want to share something on this topic from UPF founder, Reverend Moon. He said, in the family there are 4 levels: grandfather and grandmother, father and mother, you and your spouse, and your sons and daughters. This could be put different ways, but this is just in this particular example. And he said, the world is the extension of these relationships. Thus, you need to love the people of the world whose ages are similar to the people in your family in the same way you love your family members. Just as your family loves and unites centered on the parents, so you should love and harmonize with all people according to the standard by which you love your own family members. In fact, God invested more to create his partners in love than for anything else. Likewise, you should love others even more than you love your own family members. I've taught at secondary schools in London, religious education. It's quite a challenge. I noticed that today, boys in particular can accept all kinds of insults from their peers. But the line that someone crosses really at their peril is to insult their mothers.
That's right.
Right? How dare you diss my mother, they will say, This kind of disrespect is something they feel or have been trained to feel very strongly, right? And I was curious about that. In one way, it's quite nice to see, but love for family that just stops at the family is in a way self-centered love. It's an extension of self-centered love in the individual, isn't it? That's why not everything that bears the name family is good or something that we can approve of, right? And there are similar limits, I would say, on what we could call tribal or societal or national level selfishness. So, I may love my country, but if that nationalism takes on not such a nice character, then there's a limit. And it's related to kind of the problem of selfishness, which universally religions are striving to counter and to educate us out of, really, by thinking of others more than ourselves and thinking of God's love and concern for others as much as his and her concern for us. So if a child is taught to feel towards an elderly woman that they meet on the street in just the same way that they feel towards their own grandmother, then we can grasp how that would shape their character and their future interactions with any person much older than themselves. So the same with other relationships which are experienced and learnt in the family, referred back to and shaped by the experience of that family love. I noticed that Reverend Moon describes this as the family with love at its core. And here he mentions the family with love at its core is the foundation upon which each of its members bonds with others, moves and acts. A family is based on love. So throughout his speeches, the majority of which they are transcriptions of extemporaneous talks, he'll use certain speech patterns. And one that recurs very often is this idea of expansion. It was in a previous slide that I had. From individual to family to tribe to society to nation to the world. And he might even add, and then to God. There's this kind of, or should be this kind of natural order and structure in the universe. And here's an example I came across actually this morning in my morning devotion. My wife and I read together, and it said, the individual must win over the family must win over the tribe, the people, the nation, the world, and the world, the cosmos. Now, in the many times that I've seen and heard this pattern from him, and it must be, I would think, in the thousands, I don't know. Margaret's laughing because she knows too. It's a very common expression, isn't it? But I was reflecting, I've never once heard or seen written that he says something like, from the family to society and so on, or, from family to tribe, etc. Never. He'll always go through this list, right, to make a certain point, right? Well, he is a teacher, after all, right? And if you've been a teacher especially, you can spot a teacher, right? They'll often use important aphorisms or valuable facts, but not just the once, right? They'll repeat these in different conversations and sometimes even in the same conversation, right? Much of teaching is repeating. Have you ever thought why that would be? Yeah, because almost certainly the audience, be it a pupil or a whole congregation, has not got it yet. So it needs to be repeated. They know, you could say, but they don't really know. Therefore, you need to be told again, right? Maybe parents do that too, right? Yes, and maybe a child can get fed up with being told. But has their behavior really changed? Or have they, that's the point. You have to think, why am I being told this again and again? If I really loved others as I love my own family members, I would not exhibit prejudice. Is that right? Yes. So you think you know, but do you really know? That's the question. It's a very common mistake, I think, especially in the religious life. If you really knew, life would be different, and my actions would be different if I really understood. So, if people understood and lived that way, how could the mistreatment of others, such as those who fall under the title of our topic today, right? How could that ever happen? It really shouldn't, and it couldn't happen. So it's for that reason, I think, that Reverend Moore never sought the conversion of religious people, but urged them to live by and be true to their own teachings. And of course, to work with him and to work with the movement in UPF. That's very important. So together, religions of the world, I would say, can contribute to the peace and harmony of the world through the practice of genuine, unconditional love learned and experienced in the family. It may be simple, but I believe it's profound, and it's something that we can all, as religious people, we can unite on. So thank you very much.